Good evening. And thank you for the invitation to me to begin and to open this conference this evening. And I'm calling my presentation, Called to Undertake a Journey of Transformation. And I suppose what you're going to hear from me is what one would say the musings and reflections of a practical theologian. And I hope that it will bring you energy, give you something to reflect on, and that together we can go forward and have good conversation. This year of consecrated life has been a very special time for religious men and women. And we've had many conversations. Time has been spent reflecting on the invitation of Pope Francis that we heard earlier, to give gratitude for the past, to live the present with passion, and to embrace the future with hope. And this call echoes the invitation in Vita Consecrata to look to the future, where the Spirit is sending you in order to do even greater things. Just to remind ourselves that the various initiatives of the year of consecrated life are also taking place at the same time as other events mark the Jubilee of Vatican II. And remember, Vatican II was described as a breath of the Holy Spirit upon the whole Church. And Francis refers to the fruitful journey of renewal, which was undertaken by religious men and women in the wake of Vatican II. It was a grace time, and he describes it as a time with many different shades and lights. And he echoes the words of Pope John Paul II, who thanked religious for responding with boldness and courageous inventiveness to the call of Vatican II. By siding with the poor and the least, sharing their values and their anguish, often at great personal risk. And I think once again, we as consecrated men and women, we're being invited to undertake another Exodus journey. And I was reflecting on the letter from Pope Francis to announce the year of consecrated life, and the two further letters, Gaudete, rejoice, and Scrutate, keep watch, which came from the Vatican Congregation for Institutes of Consecrated Life. And these two documents invite each form of consecrated life to ask itself again, what is it that God and the people of today are asking of us? And we as religious men and women are being invited to travel onwards in Exodus along the pathways of history. We're to come to grips with new situations as they develop. We're reminded of the joy of the gospel, which calls us to weave a spirituality and to engage in a type of searching, to explore new metaphors and new images, which will create a new perspective. So I would like to begin my presentation this evening by exploring some of the metaphors and images offered in the recent documents, because I believe that images carry a generative potential which can fire our imagination. Looking backwards to 2004, there was a Congress on religious life called Passion for Christ, Passion for Humanity. And the preparatory document of that Congress asked whether consecrated men and women had lost their sense of the symbolic. The document suggested that perhaps a lack of imagination or fear had changed us into mere guardians of symbols. However, the recent documents, Rejoice and Keep Watch, invite us to reimagine religious life as we move forward to meet new challenges. But we must heed Pope Francis's warning against binding the identity of consecrated life to an old and self-referential model, to a narrow horizon. Many of the images offered in these two documents are linked to the Old Testament Exodus journey. They include images of journeys and caravans, crossroads and thresholds, frontiers, horizons and margins, and then the tiny glimpses of fire, cloud, and breeze. I'd like to begin this evening by focusing on how some of these images are calling us forth to new places, and then in the second part of the presentation, to explore how new responses are already emerging in answer to different global calls. Our task today and tomorrow and into the future will be to allow these and other images to speak to us in order to discern where the new is truly emerging. Journey. We're reminded in the documents that since Vatican II, consecrated life has undertaken an Exodus journey. It's been an epic journey with a stop-start rhythm and with many highs and lows, but that's symptomatic of the pace of our contemporary life. We're reminded that there have been times of enthusiasm and audacity and creative fidelity, but there have been also times of fragile uncertainties and even bitter disappointments. Our journey as consecrated men and women seems to have lost at times some of its vigor. We've been impatient when stops were prolonged and the final destination seemed unattainable. But now we're being asked to set out on that journey again, knowing that there will be bright patches and dark tunnels, but that it is God who guides our journey. Pope Francis calls us forth in clear and explicit ways. Listen to his language. He says, leave your nests. Go out through the door and meet the people. Go out on the streets. Go to the frontiers. Leave the center and travel towards the peripheries. Reach the fringes of humanity. Ours is to be a prophetic journey of transformation, both inward and outward. We're challenged to make the whole of our lives a pilgrimage of transformation. It's as if we've been sitting at table after a journey of doubts and sadness, and now we're invited to recognize the Lord in the breaking of bread and to go forth once again. Consecrated people are being invited to go forward clothed in the essence of the gospel, because we know that every charism of consecrated life is rooted in the gospel, and this is the place to which we must return. From there, we are to journey outward with courage, guided by the Spirit, keeping watch so that we can make choices that will honor the prophetic character of our identity. The goal of the journey is towards unknown lands. There will be glimpses, little signs of a new story as we travel, guided by the rhythm of the Spirit. We're called to travel with others, with men and women of goodwill, in unity of heart within a fragile present in which the future is waiting to be born. There will be wise and patient companions for the journey as we walk with millions of people who are on a similar journey through many different worlds and civilizations. Like Jesus on the road to Emmaus, we're to welcome those we meet, listen to their joys and sorrows, get to know their needs, their hopes and their aspirations, their failings and their disappointments. We are to be servants of communion and encounter. And so, we're joining the caravan of people, In various ways, the documents ask, where will the consecrated be in this new human journey, in this mass of humanity? Will we be like watchmen and watchwomen at the edge of things, where we can get clarity about what is happening and then discern the small, humble responses that we can make in return? Will we be prophetic witnesses of the gospel, not safeguarding the status quo and the bottom line, but demanding that resources be shared and protected? Will we take upon ourselves the desperation of people? Will we have the courage to swim against the tide of efficiency and the culture of waste? Will we have warm and tender hearts for the tired and the weak? Will we sense the mystique of living together in the midst of the chaos and the flux of things? Will we be there to mingle and encounter, to embrace and support one another, unafraid of stepping into the flood, which can seem chaotic, but there we can have a genuine experience of fraternity? Will we be part of this caravan of solidarity and work with others to form a truly human community? Will we answer the call to be part of an outgoing church, ready to leave behind what we have and undertake a long and difficult journey, like Abraham traveling into the land of Canaan, or Moses moving towards a mysterious land linked to the patriarchs? Pope Francis encourages us to continue the journey in and among the people, led by the Spirit, never unyielding, never closed, always open to the voice of God. Crossroads and thresholds. This is another symbol which echoes through the documents. As consecrated men and women, part of this outgoing church, we are to be there at the crossroads, ready to pitch our tents on untrodden paths and move into new landscapes. There we're called to bear witness to the gospel, offering help and solidarity of every kind. And the documents offer and name some of the crossroads of today's world. And I'm just going to list them here, and we'll contemplate each one of them. Recognition and respect for the legitimate rights of individuals and peoples. The development of relationships of gratuitousness, mercy, solidarity, and communion. The pursuit of development goals that possess a more humane and humanizing value. The protection of human dignity and identity amid the flow of digital communication and the world of networks. The ability to listen to and respond to the spiritual yearnings and desires of the people of our times. To be present with the weak and defenseless, especially those at the mercy of economic interests or indiscriminate exploitation. To protect the unborn. To protect our common home, the earth which has been burdened and laid waste. To go among people threatened by war and violence. To be with migrants, victims of human trafficking and new forms of slavery. To be with women who have suffered exclusion, mistreatment, and violence. But we know that as religious men and women, we've always been in these landscapes. We've always been at these crossroad places. But now the documents and the call of Pope Francis is asking us to find new and courageous ways to reach all and to go beyond, not just beyond, but beyond and into the thick of things where everything is at stake. These are threshold places where the Spirit groans aloud and where we no longer know what to say or what to do, often because of the enormity of the challenge. But the Spirit knows the plans of God and hands them over to us. We will find new ways if we stand on thresholds and open new clearings in the jungle of human life. New frontiers, horizons, and margins. The documents use these three symbols, calling us to search the horizons of our own lives and of our times in watchful prayer. We're to broaden our horizons because before us appear new realities, other cultures, different necessities, emerging peripheries. Searching the horizon of our times, we glimpse new needs, but they call for discernment and new actions. The frontiers which beckon us to move forward and engage in new questions include the experience of the poor, interreligious and intercultural dialogue, the complementarity of men and women, environmentalism in a sick world, eugenics without scruples, the globalized economy, and planetary communication. These, we are told, are the new hermeneutical horizons which cannot simply be listed, but which we must inhabit and bring firmly under the guidance of the Spirit. The documents point out that the margins and frontiers calling us onward are geographic, urban, and existential. They are margins of the mystery of sin, pain, injustice, and misery, but we're to go there to search for the signs of God so that we can make bold evangelical choices. But on the horizon, there are small signs. On the journey ahead, we keep watching for the small signs of the Spirit guiding us forward. While keeping in our hearts the hopes of the world, we're to look for the unpredictable arrival of the little cloud, the coming of rain, the appearance of the morning star, the gentle breeze, or the fire that shines within the cloud. We know these biblical symbols are indications that we will be led onwards by small, frail signs, but we need to look for those signs through the practice of discernment, individually and in our communities and institutes. For we're responsible for searching the sky together for small signs that call us to put our meager resources into play. Yes, our resources can be meager, and acknowledging the experience of diminishment is new for many of us as religious men and women. We had grown accustomed to having at our disposal many resources, including personnel and institutions, accompanied often by power, privilege, and good standing. We have to ask ourselves, had we then become managers of the routine, resigned to mediocrity, restrained from intervening, no longer having the courage to point out the purposes of authentic consecrated life? But we know that our hope can't be built on the foundations of our strength or of our numbers or of our successes. Instead, the experience of weakness, confusion, and searching places us now among the women and men of our day. But what we have to offer is our belief that God has passed by, even if he has not left footprints, but we have known him. We're being called to greater fidelity to the God of surprises, and to believe that whenever we make the effort to return to the source and to recover the freshness of the gospel, new avenues will arise, new paths of creativity will open up, different forms of expression will emerge, more eloquent signs and words with new meaning for today's world. So in concluding this first section and looking at the images that have been presented in the various documents, I think they have shown that the global call to religious is an invitation to an inner transformation that will propel us outward in service at the margins of life. And as we respond to new needs, who and how we are to be will emerge. And now in the second part of this presentation, I would like to share a few examples of where the new calls are emerging and how they're calling forth new responses. The first call is the call to go inward. At the 2013 Assembly of the Superiors General in Rome, Sister Marian Ambrosia, who was then president of the Conference of Religious of Brazil, spoke about the inner journey being undertaken by the sisters in her country. They had recognized that religious life was in a liminal place, and that as religious sisters, they must recognize and accept their non-place in society and in the church. They were no longer the best teachers, the best nurses, the best social workers, the best pastoral agents. These were the roles that they were now letting go of. And this is how they expressed their new reality. This safe house that we have inhabited until now no longer confers any legitimacy on us. This is our rich and precious opportunity, because the non-place is the biblical place of the prophets. Outside of the palace, the forum, and of the temple, the prophets lend their voices and their lives to the God of life. The sisters in Brazil had the courage to ask themselves challenging questions. Who are we? What social and ecclesial place do we occupy today? What significance do we hold today for the church and for the world? And for them, the answer was simply to begin anew. And this involved searching out the most profound meaning of their vocation in their contemporary Brazilian context, to redefine religious life in its call as discipleship of Jesus and discipleship of the reign of God. And what they said was that this inward journey, there was no sense of disappointment or frustration or disenchantment. The biblical foundation of their preferential option for the poor was named as their strength. They were making choices to be among the people, to listen and to reassure, to comfort and to console, especially where there was little or no presence of the institutional church. They were seeking to incarnate the symbolic, mystical, prophetic dimension of religious life just by their very presence. And I believe this type of inner journey is being taken by many religious men and women in other parts of the world today who are leaving behind institutions and prestige and going to the forgotten and abandoned places in rural and urban settings. The second call is to frontier living. As religious, we're being called to frontiers that are both tangible and intangible. They can be political borders which separate people one from another. They're often visible borders today, like the barbed wire fence recently constructed in Hungary, the fence along the US-Mexican border, the 14-mile wall separating Tangier in Morocco with Tarifa at the African side of the Straits of Gibraltar, and there are many other borders. These are structures which prevent people from crossing from one side to the other. But there are also many invisible borders which are just as effective in controlling the inclusion or exclusion of people, such as the criminalization of migration, institutionalized racism, or systems of distributing social benefits. Sister Pepe Torres Perez, a Spanish theologian, sees frontiers as places of resilience and creativity, where God is revealed and love is proclaimed. The recent events in Hungary, Austria, and Germany have shown us both the ugly face of exclusion, but also the grace of welcome and solidarity. I don't think I'll ever forget the moving sight of hundreds of Austrian citizens driving to Budapest to form a convoy of welcome for the refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and many other places. Or the sight of the citizens of Austria and Germany applauding their arrival in their cities. Mercedes Navarro reminds us that the Christian God is a border God, a frontier God. And she says, to survive at the frontiers, one must live without frontiers and be at crossroads. Today, all over Europe and in many parts of the world, religious men and women are literally standing at crossroads. They're present in bus and train stations. They're at borders between countries, ministering to those who are searching for hope and happiness and the promise of a peaceful life free from fear. The UISG is currently preparing 10 sisters, to form 2 international communities in Sicily to accompany the many thousands of migrants living in holding centres. And these sisters are from 8 different religious communities and 8 different nationalities. And the local church is inviting them to be a bridge between the migrants and the local community who often feel unable to cope. And we hope and pray that their intercultural presence and living will be a witness of communion and encounter at one of the world's suffering borders. Another example is that of 2 congregations of religious brothers who have joined together to establish evening schools for thousands of migrant children in the refugee camps in Lebanon. They're mobilizing their past and present students to take part in this initiative. And those 2 congregations of brothers are also coordinating the presence of religious men and women in the bus and train stations of Italy. These small examples of religious being present together at frontier lands and crossroads is in answer to Pope Francis's appeal to see migrants and refugees as persons, seeing their face, listening to their stories, and trying to respond as best we can to their situation. The third call is to places devastated by war and violence. You know, there have been over 250 armed conflicts since the conclusion of World War II. And we know that religious men and women have been present in the midst of these conflicts and have also tried to respond in their aftermath. When a group of religious made a solidarity visit to South Sudan in March 2006, the physical scars of war were very evident. And yet the world had been oblivious to the fact that 2 civil wars had taken place in the region of Sudan since independence in 1955. One commentator wrote poignantly that these wars had been fought behind a grass curtain. The media wasn't there. The casualties left 2 million dead and 2 million displaced. The group who visited listened much and spoke little, listening to the trauma and suffering of the people. Yet all the time the people kept saying, "Thank you for coming to be with us. We thought that the world had forgotten about us. We thought that the Universal Church had forgotten about us." This context and many other contexts of war and violence raise the question, how can religious congregations worldwide respond to the plight of people who feel abandoned? The group in South Sudan felt that they were led by the Spirit to a new type of response. The Congress on Religious Life in 2004 had suggested that a new paradigm was needed, born of compassion for the scarred and downtrodden of the earth, a paradigm around new priorities, new models of organization, and open and flexible collaboration between men and women of goodwill. On the group's return to Rome, a detailed report was presented to the leaders of religious congregations, suggesting a new collaborative model where religious congregations worldwide and laity would join in solidarity and offer finance, personnel, and expertise. Today in South Sudan, in the initiative called Solidarity with South Sudan, over 30 Solidarity members, male and female, from over 20 different congregations, joined by lay collaborators, are supported by hundreds of congregations and by many other donor organizations. Each education or training program focuses in a special way on peace building and on the formation of agents of healing and reconciliation. Much is being achieved, even in very difficult circumstances. But I believe that it is the witness of intercultural, intercongregational community living of men and women which is the greatest contribution. These communities are a tangible sign of the ability of people from different cultures and traditions to live and thrive together. But other places are calling out for the presence of religious to help with healing and reconstruction. Other regions and countries, are we ready to go? The fourth call is to be with victims of human trafficking. Since 2009, the International Network of Religious Women and Men Against Trafficking of Human Persons, which is called Talitha Kum, has been growing in influence and scope. The coordination office in Rome works with 24 national and regional networks working in over 81 countries on every continent. While very difficult to estimate, there are said to be at least 21 million people who have experienced forced or coerced human trafficking worldwide for labor, for prostitution, and for different kinds of exploitation, including organ trafficking. International research shows that intra-regional and domestic trafficking are the major forms of trafficking in persons. They're in every single one of our countries. Pope Francis has called trafficking a plague on the body of contemporary humanity and calls on society to pass legislation that penalizes traffickers and helps to rehabilitate victims. But he has also called on consecrated men and women to play their part to combat this evil. And he has particularly asked religious to promote the feast of St. Paquita on February the 8th as a World Day Against Human Trafficking, a day of awareness raising and prayer. And this is something in which we can all participate. But we can do small things that can have huge significance. And I'm just going to give you a very simple story. In a village in the northeast of India, a priest gave a homily at Mass on human dignity and the devious nature of trafficking. Some weeks later, one of his parishioners, who regularly drove a truck from Darjeeling to Calcutta, was asked to give a ride to 3 teenage girls whom he told were going to the city to work in a restaurant. But on the way down, he realized that these 3 young girls were being sent to Calcutta for another purpose. He stopped on the way, made some phone calls, and eventually was put in contact with a shelter in Calcutta where religious women protect those that have been rescued from trafficking. This is a story with a happy ending, but many don't end that way. However, I believe that the many networks being sponsored by religious that promote awareness, that rescue, rehabilitate and lobby are growing in strength, and they're collaborating and networking with others. Today, as I speak, on the borders of Brazil, Peru and Colombia, a local priest has developed a very effective counter-trafficking network to interrupt the activities of traffickers. This is a dangerous ministry, but he, like many others, are willing to give their lives to rescue and protect the most vulnerable of all. The 5th call is to become part of the global movement of people protecting our common environment. You and I know that for decades, consecrated men and women have been campaigning, protesting, raising awareness, praying, engaging in lobbying and advocacy to protect the environment and to promote sustainable development. The recent encyclical outlines that authentic human development presumes full respect for the human person, but must also be concerned for the world around us. The cry of the poor and the cry of the earth are intrinsically linked. Pope Francis reminds us that listening to the cries of the earth and of the poorest of those who live there should lead to real, serious efforts to care for them both. And he says, in this way, creation will become more of the common home that the one Father has imaged it to be, as a gift for the universal family of his creatures. But he asks whether our generation will be remembered for having generously shouldered its grave responsibilities. But throughout the world, religious men and women are developing projects which link care of the earth and the promotion of human development. I'm sure if we sat down at each of these tables, you could describe projects that you know. I'm thinking of the Franciscans in central Italy who have developed a sustainable farm where the recovering drug addicts produce organic produce for the city markets. Or in Indonesia, where a group of sisters have developed organic farming methods to grow high-quality rice, which offers a sustainable livelihood to local farmers, most of whom are Muslim. And recently, a worldwide network of religious men and women surveyed the impact of mining and mining techniques on the environment and on the livelihood and quality of the lives of local people. And this research project is now proving to be a very useful tool when lobbying at national and international levels. And we're aware of the many representatives of religious congregations at the United Nations who are lobbying for sustainable development goals. And I just point out the Africa-Europe Faith and Justice Network, the Africa Faith and Justice Network here in the United States, both organizations set up by religious congregations, are lobbying the European Union, but also lobbying Congress on behalf of Africa in relation to climate change. They point out that although Africa has contributed the least to greenhouse gas emissions, it will be among the worst affected regions by global warming. But once again, we have an opportunity at congregational level and intercongregationally to collaborate and network for change. And the final call is to engage in interreligious dialogue. This year in Rome, obviously in the context of what's happening in our world, but also on the 50th anniversary of the Vatican document Nostra Aetate, this age of ours, there's been an increased highlighting of the importance of interreligious dialogue. In the middle of the 1960s, when this document was issued, it acknowledged that people were coming closer together and that bonds of friendship were being strengthened. Yet today, in view of the numerous conflicts worldwide, often labeled as religious conflicts, can we honestly say that the bonds of friendship are being strengthened? I think back to the words of Pope John Paul II in Assisi in 1986, when he warned that either we learn to walk together in peace and harmony, or we drift apart and ruin ourselves and others. And during Pope Francis's recent visit to Sri Lanka, where he met the leaders of the various religious communities, Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, and Christian, and in his address he said to them, for the sake of peace, religious beliefs must never be allowed to be abused in the cause of violence and war. We must be clear and unequivocal in challenging our communities to live fully the tenets of peace and coexistence found in each religion. And we must denounce acts of violence when they are committed. Nostra Aetate presented a theological vision of the unity of the human race, but it also accepted that people do not walk along the same path when they search for answers to the unsolved riddles of human existence. But the Church continually strives to meet the followers of other religious traditions. And last year, you may remember, in a dialogue of action, Catholic, Anglican, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, Jewish, and Orthodox leaders signed a joint declaration of religious leaders against modern slavery. And the initiative called Religions for Peace, of whom the Catholic Church is a member, recently launched their Faiths for Earth campaign with an online course on Laudate Si, introduced by none other than the U2 singer Bono. So that's some ecumenical action. But these two international actions against trafficking and for care of the earth are being repeated at different levels by religious men and women. And the two unions of superiors general have been promoting the importance of interreligious dialogue, and many general chapters have confirmed this commitment. But you and I know that it's often at the local level, in villages, in families, in local communities, in schools. That's where the reality of interreligious dialogue is lived out on a daily basis. And by promoting friendly relationships with one's neighbour from other faiths, this is an important part of accepting and rejoicing in difference and building peace and harmony. And so I've come to the end, so take a breath. In the words of the apostolic letter, let's constantly set out anew with trust in the Lord. The whole world awaits us. We are to be signs of hope, finding ways to create alternate spaces where the way of the gospel, a way of presence and self-giving, of encounter and communion, of embracing differences, of healing and reconciliation can be experienced. We're finding new ways of being present among the broken and excluded. We are collaborating and networking together to bring the gifts of our different charisms together to respond to new and complex needs. I have a new mantra. I say, never do alone what we can do together. That our choice must be to do things together. We're called to be bold and inventive as we live through this time of global transition and new requirements. As individuals and as communities, we are undertaking sacred pilgrimages, and we're rediscovering the responsibility of being prophetic. We really are trying to live in an attitude of dialogue and solidarity, of profound tenderness and sympathy with the men and women of today and their culture. Around this room, we know each of us that our religious institutes or our family was born to inspire new journeys, to travel unforeseen routes, and to respond to human needs. Now we in our time must set out again on untrodden paths and new highways, but this time let's go forward together. There is still much to do. The journey continues, but we know that God's grace accompanies us. And I couldn't finish without quoting an Irish poet. And so I draw on the words of John O'Donoghue. When pondering the mystery of grace, he wrote, "Grace suggests how fluent and seamless the divine presence is. Grace is the permanent climate of divine kindness. It suggests a compassion and understanding for all the ambivalent and contradictory dimensions of the human experience and the human pain. This climate of kindness nurtures the sore landscape of the human heart and urges torn ground to heal and to become fruitful." And let us end together by saying this prayer together. May the grace of God nourish, restore, and renew us, and send us forth as... Amen. Amen.